Good morning. Welcome to our third Constitution Day program today. And happy Constitution Day. So glad to have all of you joining us this morning. Today is the 237th anniversary of the signing of the Constitution. So grateful to have a document that has served our country well for so many years. My name is Julie, and I'm an educator with the Eisenhower Foundation, coming to you from Abilene, Kansas, the home of Dwight D. Eisenhower. So in this program, we're going to be doing a few things together. We're going to be analyzing a primary source letter written to President Eisenhower. Then we're going to be examining a couple of other letters, and you'll even have the opportunity to write a letter to the president. There were some materials sent out to go with this program that has that information. If you don't have that information, contact us. We're happy to send that out. But we'll get started with our program, Dear Mr. President. All right. So, have you heard of the First Amendment before? Very important part of the Constitution. And it says Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. All right, so we get lots of rights through the First Amendment. Guarantees our freedom of religion, our freedom of expression, right? To assemble and to petition our government, tell them what we like, what we don't like. All right, so that really packs a big punch, right? Lots of things in that First Amendment of the Constitution. And that's what we're going to kind of focus on today with that last part, to petition the government for a redress of grievances. And so that means the right to contact our elected officials. So how do we do that? How do we contact the president? Do any of you have any ideas? How could we contact the president if we wanted to let President Biden know something? Put some of your ideas in the chat. If you wanted to contact the president, what do you think would be an easy way to do that? So yes, we certainly could use social media and the internet, right? What other ways could we use to contact the president? Call? Yeah, pick up the phone and call. We could try that. How about a megaphone? Could we stand outside in the White House with a megaphone? Well, it could be tried, maybe. The problem is that the president does have social media managers who take care of all of those social media sites for him. He doesn't give out his personal phone number, so we do not have a direct line to the president. And, yelling in a megaphone might have mixed results. It might work only if he was listening. So even though we have technology the founding fathers never even dreamed of, right? That wouldn't have even been in their wildest imagination. Writing a letter is still the best way to contact the president. And while President Eisenhower was in office, he received thousands of letters. And a lot of them were from kids, just like you. Going back to that First Amendment, does it put any restrictions on who can or can't contact the president or government officials? Does it say anything about age? Does it say anything about what your job is? Do you have to be a voter to contact the president? No, absolutely not. You can be anyone and contact the president through a letter. So today we're going to look at some letters that President Eisenhower received. Those letters are called primary sources. Have you heard of primary sources before? Or maybe you've heard them called firsthand accounts. So what exactly is a primary source? What does that term mean? Or could you give me an example of a primary source? On this slide, there are some examples of primary sources. Do any of you want to share some of your ideas of what a primary source is? So a primary source is basically evidence from the past. And as you can see from our slide, it can be lots of different things. It could be photographs, it could be artifacts, autobiographies, maps, movies, newspapers, letters, lots of things. But the key is they were created during the time period that we are studying. And so we're going to be talking about President Eisenhower. And so the letters that we're going to be looking at were all written while President Eisenhower was in office. And all of these letters were actually found right here in the Presidential Library in Abilene. Second type of source is a secondary source. So secondary sources can be books, they can be your teacher, they could be television shows, websites. So secondary sources are different from primary sources because they're the result of someone learning about the topic. And they're great tools to learn from. A lot of what we learn from are from secondary sources. But primary sources are special because you actually get to see a real piece of history. And a lot of our programs here at the Eisenhower Museum and Library, you get to actually hold them in your hands, which is really cool, and kind of draw your own conclusions about that time in history. All right. So as I said, the letters that we are going to be reading today, looking at today, are primary sources. And when we look at primary sources, we go through a process to understand it. We start by examining and analyzing it. And we ask a lot of questions about that source that we are looking at, such as who created it? When did they create it? Why did they create it? What is it made of? Is it similar to anything that I'm familiar with? What do I know already? And what do I want to know about that? And so since we're just kind of together for a short time this morning, we won't be able to do any actual research, but I'm going to go through that process with you. And so when you have more time after the program, I encourage you to do more research on your own or as a class. In the meantime, I'm happy to answer any questions the best that I can about what we talk about today. And so that would make me a primary source or secondary source. Well, since I wasn't around at the time that President Eisenhower was president, I'm a secondary source. I try to learn as much about it as I can to share with you. Okay, so some of you may have received in the resources sent out the letters that we're going to be looking at today. And if you have those, get out the letter written by Phyllis Ann Barnes. If you don't have the letter, no problem. You can just follow along with us on the slide. We're going to examine this letter together. There's also a typed copy of the letter that came with it That makes it a lot easier to read. Well, let's go ahead and read this letter from Phyllis Ann Barnes to President Eisenhower. And it says, Dear Mr. President, I am Phyllis Ann Barnes, and I am in the 4th grade at Jesse Hunter Black School. I've heard lots of people complain about our country and government. So I am writing this to tell you how much I love my country. I like the beautiful mountains, streams, parks, lakes of Minnesota, big trees in Yosemite, Grand Canyon, Indians of New Mexico and Arizona, the wide open prairies of my own home state of Kansas. I also like the smooth, wide highways that our taxes help pay for. And it is because of this we pay taxes. So at our house, we do not mind paying taxes. And I also like the privilege of choosing my own Sunday school, friends, pets, TV shows, food, and clothes. It sure makes me feel good inside when I hear the Star-Spangled Banner and when I hear you talk. I can hardly wait to see our new flag. It sure does make me feel safe when I see the big bombers go over our house. I pray at night that we never have to use them. I think you are a very nice president. My daddy said that anyone that wanted to could write to the president. So I am to thank you for what you are doing for us. Sincerely yours, Phyllis Ann Barnes. All right, well, guess what? Phyllis received a letter back from President Eisenhower, and it said, Dear Phyllis, thank you so much for your nice letter. Our country is a wonderful one. We love its beauty as we cherish the freedom it offers us. That is why we must all work and pray and perhaps sacrifice to preserve it. With best wishes to a fine young citizen, sincerely, Dwight D. Eisenhower. And you can see up at the top, it was written on March 31st, 1959. And I will tell you that we have done this program here in Abilene with different school groups, and we have had students write to the president and receive an answer back. So that does happen. Okay, so we can find out some really cool things by analyzing this letter. It contained a whole lot of information for us about Phyllis, but also the time frame that she lived. So let's examine it together. We're going to use these questions over on the left side of the screen. First of all, who wrote this letter? We can look on that last page. We know that it was a girl named Phyllis Ann Barnes, right there where it says, Sincerely yours. All right, everyone find that? Okay, so the second thing we're going to look at, what year was the letter written? Usually the letter is on the first page. Let's take a look. There at the top of the first page, we can see a date, 1959. See that right up there? It has her street address, the date, and she's from Wichita, Kansas when she wrote this letter. All right. So the next thing we're going to ask ourselves is, why did she write this letter? Okay. And so you can see kind of the choices there. Maybe she wrote it to say thank you. Maybe she wrote it to show support or encouragement to the president. Maybe she wanted to share an idea or a suggestion that she wanted the president to consider. Maybe she wanted to complain or share a concern. A lot of people do. Maybe she wanted to ask a question, or maybe she had some other reason for writing that letter. Well, she did say thank you, right? She wanted to thank you for what you are doing for us. Do you think that her letter contained anything else? Did she show support or encouragement? I think she probably definitely did, right? Do you think she shared an idea or suggestion? I don't know about that. I didn't really hear her complain. She said that other people complained, right? But she didn't really have any complaints at all. Didn't hear her ask any questions. She did have some other things to say. She wanted to tell President Eisenhower how much she loves our country, right? We find that in her third sentence. Okay. So we've examined it, we've analyzed it, but you know what? There's some things in here that I have to ask some questions about that I'm not too sure about. And maybe those questions can help us learn some more about life in the 1950s. Remember, she wrote this letter in 1959. And so when we ask some questions and do some research, we can learn about what was going on during that time, right? All right. So she said something about a new flag. Now, that is really curious to me. What new flag is she talking about? Um, and why would President Eisenhower know anything about a new flag? Hmm. I think that's something that I would like to research and maybe find more about. So I'm going to have to do some inferring here. And to infer means to make an inference. Um, that means that I'm going to come to a conclusion based on what I've read, but also what I already know. Okay. So she wrote in her letter um, that I can hardly wait to see our new flag. Okay. So we have a clue in there. She did say she's writing about how much she loves America. So is she talking about the flag of America? Why would that, why would our flag be new? We need to do some deeper in research there. All right. So she's talking about the American flag. Why did America need a new flag? That is a good question, right? Okay, so here we go. Let's do some research here. All right. So the letter says, I can hardly wait to see our new flag. The question that we have is, what new flag is she talking about? Why would America need a new flag? Okay, well, we are so lucky that we have Google, we have search engines. If we pick out a few clue words, we can find out a lot of information. So, what might be some good clue words that we could enter into our search? What do we know? What do we know about? Do we know a date or a time? What do we know about Phyllis's letter that could help us do some research? We do know she's talking about a new flag. We know the letter was written in 1959. We know that, she's definitely proud of the United States. So let's enter those clues into a search engine. See what we come up with. Okay, so here are our findings. So it says a new flag must be created when new states are admitted to the Union? Oh, okay. Alaska was added in January of 1959 as the 49th state of the Union. So before that, before January of 1959, we only had 48 states. When Alaska became a state in January of 1959, would we have to make a new flag? Yeah, I bet we would. President Eisenhower's executive order provided that a new flag be created with 49 stars. There we go. Oh, look at this. Hawaii was added in August of 1959 as the 50th state of the Union. And then President Eisenhower's executive order provided that a new flag be created with 50 stars. All right, so going back to our first question, a new flag, I wonder which one she's talking about, because they would have to create two new flags, right? One with 49 stars and then one with 50 stars. Is there a way that we can answer that question? Is she talking about a flag with 49 stars, or is she talking about a flag with 50 stars? Well, I think we can find that out by looking at the date of her letter, right? Do you remember what the date was? If you look at the top of the letter, it was March 8th, 1959. Okay, so that is a huge clue, because in March, had Hawaii been accepted as a new state yet? No. So she was talking about a flag being created with 49 stars. Wow, that was a lot of research, but interesting, okay, right? Let's go back to our questions. We examined, we analyzed, we asked questions, and we did our research. Okay, so America is getting a new flag because Alaska became a state. All right, going back to her letter, what are some other things in there that maybe you asked questions about, or maybe you wondered about? What did she talk about that maybe seemed a little strange to us today? Especially if we lived here in Kansas or lived, well, anywhere in the United States, really. What seemed unusual? Yeah, she's talked about the smooth, wide highways that our taxes help pay for. Why would she thank him for that? We've had highways forever, haven't we? Well, actually, if we did a little research, we would reveal that the highways were built in 1956, is when they started building the interstate highway, when President Eisenhower was president. The first stretch of the interstate highway was completed right here in Kansas, the first 8 miles just west of Topeka, and made a huge difference in the lives of American citizens at that time. It was just really the difference of night and day between the old roads that we had and the nice highway system. She also talked about she felt safe that the military bomber planes were flying over her house, but she hopes they were never needed. That's kind of interesting, because were we in a war in 1959? World War II was over, but we were in something called the Cold War, where we weren't shooting guns or anything like that, but there was the threat of nuclear war. That was kind of on everyone's minds at that time. And so we can speculate that Phyllis probably heard about this, maybe on the news, maybe she heard her parents or teachers talking about it. And so she was thankful that there were bomber airplanes protecting them, that the US was preparing for another possible war, is what she said. All right. So let's see some more primary source letters. We have a couple more letters that were also written to President Eisenhower. These were created between January 1953 and January 1961 when Dwight Eisenhower was president. So let's take a look at this next letter. If you have this letter in your resources that we sent out, you can pull this out. It also has a typed version, which is a little easier to read. So let me read this to get with you. Dear Mr. President, our school is out. I got a perfect report. I want to thank you for my 2 polio shots. Mother says she trusts you with a capital T. Us 5 kids pray for you every night. Donald is just 3, and he puts you in with our dear black Sambo cat who is lost. I will be 7 August 12th. An awful lot of folks love you. Your friend, Linda Hay. So if we go through our questions, as far as who wrote this letter, it was a girl named Linda Hay. The date is a little hard to read. If you go up to the top, it looks like someone else wrote that date in there. But up at the very top, it says 6/28/55. So June 28th, 1955, this letter was written. And why did she write this letter? Did she thank him? Did she encourage him? Did she suggest an idea? Did she ask a question? Did she complain about something? Or did she have something else on her mind? What are your ideas? Put those in the chat. What was Linda talking about in this letter? Why did she write this letter to President Eisenhower? Right, so someone says she thanked him. What did she thank him for? A letter, it says, I want to thank you for my 2 polio shots. Oh my goodness. Have you ever thanked someone for the shots that you got? This makes me want to do a little research, right? Why would she be thanking the president for shots? Oh, those hurt. Well, after doing a little research, putting in polio shots and 1955 in our search engine, we find out that polio was a huge issue before that time, especially for children. It was a disease that a lot of children got and caused serious injuries and problems for children. And now most kids get their polio shots a lot of times before you're old enough to go to school. But at that time, there were no polio shots until a doctor named Jonas Salk came up with a vaccine or shot that prevented polio. President Eisenhower believed completely in Dr. Salk's invention, and so he encouraged everyone to get the shot. And so we can also go back to Linda's letter where she says that her mother says she trusts you with a capital T. So when President Eisenhower told people they needed to get the shot, she trusted that he was telling them the truth. So the shot became available for children to take on April 12th, 1955. And so going back to our letter, when did Linda write her letter? It was on June 28th, 1955. And she talks about getting 2 shots. So if you remember your polio shot, at least at that time, you got 1 shot and then you got a booster shot, kind of like the COVID shots that we have now, right? She was probably one of the first of citizens or children during that time to get her polio shot, both her initial shot and her booster. So it's kind of neat history about that time. Let's go on to our third letter. Okay, so let me read this letter to you. This was written December 21st, 1958, and he's got Merry Xmas up at the top, wishing President Eisenhower a Merry Christmas. From the date, we can tell it's very close to Christmas, only 4 days away. Dear Mr. President, I don't think it's fair to make children go to school all year. The only fair way to decide if school should be all year is to have every child who goes to school in this country and the parents and teachers vote. Suppose you had school all year, and every teacher did not like the idea and they quit. Then there would be nobody to teach us. The teachers and children should be with their family for 2 months. Sincerely, Stephen Levy. Oh, Stephen's got some strong opinions here, doesn't he? So we've looked at who wrote the letter. We've looked at the date. And I think we can figure out why he wrote this letter, right? There may be a couple of reasons. Why did he write this letter? Let me know in the chat. What were his reasons? He had a strong opinion that he wanted to share with President Eisenhower. What was that opinion? Well, certainly he wanted to wish President Eisenhower Merry Christmas, right? He also did not want year-round school. Can some of you relate to that? He was very adamant, and he is suggesting that everyone should vote on that, right? Parents and teachers should vote on that. And he was very afraid that if we had year-round school, all the teachers would quit. What a travesty, right? That would not be good. Well, do any of you wonder why he's concerned about this? Have you ever been concerned about this or wondered if that might happen someday? So we can do a little research, kind of research what was going on with the education system back in 1958. And this kind of goes along with what we talked about when we were talking about the Cold War. Along with the Cold War, there was the space race. The Soviet Union was sending satellites and spacecraft into space, and the United States definitely wanted to keep up, and they developed their own space program. It was decided that our schools really needed to emphasize, especially science and math. And so President Eisenhower signed the National Defense and Education Act in 1958 to strengthen our schools academically. Science and math were prioritized because of the space race and also because of the development of computer systems. Computers were just starting to be invented at that time. And believe me, they were nothing like our computers now. They were great, big, huge things that could fill an entire room. But President Eisenhower saw a need for making sure that students had the knowledge they needed in science and math, especially. There was nothing really that I could find that talked about President Eisenhower wanting year-round school. But I think all of this talk about making schools more academically rigorous maybe worried Stephen, and he thought that school might be extended all year long. That was my reasoning. Do you have any other ideas on that that you could share with me? Would that worry you maybe? And maybe he was just wanting to have a nice long Christmas break. Who knows?
We're getting some yeses on the chat from people.
Yes. So in the chat, we're getting lots of people who might be a little worried about having year-round school. Do you agree with him that children should be with their family for 2 months? Get to do all kinds of fun things when you're with your family, right? Over summer break. I think he was worried that this summer break was going to be spent in school. All right. So now it is your turn. If you would like to write a letter to President Biden, what are some things that we might write about? What are some topics that you could share or write about to President Biden? If you have some of those ideas, put those in the chat. And think about maybe what's going on in your community. And remember, it doesn't have to be things you're worried about. It could be things that are making you really happy or you're grateful for.
We have a comment in the chat referring back to our Bill Becomes a Law program and suggesting that maybe the legal working age could be lowered.
Okay, so those of you who are with our Bill Becomes a Law program that we had earlier today, we talked about lowering the legal working age. And so that was brought up as something that we could write to the president about. Maybe giving younger people an opportunity to have a job. Any other ideas? Inflation is a topic that a lot of families are worried about right now. And gas prices, absolutely. Especially if you live in a rural area and have to drive. Some other ideas: homelessness, the environment, school funding, recycling laws, healthcare, employment, pets. You could talk about your favorite things. You could talk about your family. Those are all good topics to write to the president about. Now, Stephen Levy's letter was pretty close to a complaint, but was he rude? No, absolutely not. And this is a really good rule for all of us. Whether you like the president or you don't is irrelevant. So if you're going to write to the president, you must be kind and respectful. You can absolutely say, I don't like this. This upsets me. You could say even this makes me feel angry. But be careful not to use name calling or insults, because nobody likes to read that. And the president would probably just put your letter right back down and not even finish reading it. When you're writing a letter, it's always a good idea to make a rough draft. Sometimes that's called a sloppy copy first. Then you can look it over, correct any mistakes that you see before sending a nice, clean copy of your letter. And you might have noticed in some of the letters that we just read, there might have been a few mistakes, and that's okay. That happens sometimes. But just do your best and ask for help if you get stuck. All right, and always remember to be kind. That is a good reflection on you. Okay, so your teacher, your parent might have received some stationery and some information about how to send your letter to the White House. And your teacher can decide if your whole class wants to write letters or if you have the option of writing a letter yourself, we have information of how to write it and how to send it, and the stationery that you are welcome to use as well. So in addition to practicing your right as an American citizen to ask questions and share opinions with our elected officials, guess what? Your letter will be entered into the official files of the US government, just like the letters that were sent to President Eisenhower. So as I said before, all of the letters that you saw to President Eisenhower are kept right here in the Dwight Eisenhower Presidential Library. And so the letters that you send to President Biden will be preserved in the presidential archives as a part of American history. And they will have a home in the Biden Presidential Library someday. So you'll have an opportunity to make history just like the kids who wrote to Ike. That is really cool. So I really encourage you to write a letter to the president. And who knows, maybe you will get an answer back. It does take a while, though. As we talked about earlier, the president gets thousands and thousands of letters, so it might take a while. And he's a pretty busy guy. He's got lots to do and lots on his mind. All right. So before we go today, are there any questions you would like to ask? If you do need any resources, if you didn't get the resource packet that goes with this lesson, please contact us here at the Eisenhower Foundation, and we can certainly get that sent out to you. So today we learned about primary sources and secondary sources. We analyzed some primary sources in the letters sent to President Eisenhower and found out some really interesting information about what was going on during the 1950s when President Eisenhower was serving in office. Again, I want to encourage you to practice your right as an American citizen to question and share opinions with our elected officials. I really do think they want to listen to citizens because we are the ones who elect them and put them into office. If there are no further questions, thank you so much for joining us here today. Enjoy the rest of your Constitution Day. And please contact us, look into our other programs. Have an awesome day. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.